Hello and welcome to Hardware Intel, the in-ear edition. This is the podcast from UAP exploring how hardware can help shape our future. From households to large-scale industrial, we'll be discussing a wide range of topics. We've got expert insight from within the building industry and thoughtful opinions about how hardware is advancing communities all around the world.
One word, Grenfell, basically. Prior to that, there was, I wouldn't say there's a relaxed sort of mood in the market, but there was a lot of ignorance.
Building owners and clients are actually engaging and employing these people to come and do a fire assessment check on all the fire doors on a regular basis. I mean, that was something that wasn't as prevalent probably 18 months, 2 years ago.
I'm Sian Astley, a TV presenter and property expert, and I'm fascinated by the impact that good hardware solutions can have on all of our lives. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about fire protection using modern technology. And joining me today are Simon Marr, the General Manager at Intelligent Hardware, and Paul Goggins, the Specification Manager at UAP. Welcome, gentlemen, and welcome to Hardware Intel. This is the final episode of the series, but I'm presuming that they're saving the best till last.
I was just going to say that.
Were you? Did I beat you to that?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your roles at UAP.
I'm on the specification side. So one of the things, I started here about 3.5 years ago. My background is in fire doors and security doors. I was with a manufacturer. And so I found that most of UAP's customers were actually door manufacturers and external door manufacturers or security door manufacturers. So we weren't that well known amongst specifiers. When I was with the door producer, we got most of our work by engaging architects and influencers within the industry to specify our products. Gives you a head start then in terms of when the contractors are out in the market searching for products. If their clients are putting your name forward, obviously that's a great advantage. UAP, because we're a couple of notches down the supply chain, we weren't that well known to that particular audience, really, the specifiers and architects. And it's arguable whether they'd be interested to that degree. In other words, if they're specifying a fire safety product such as a fire door, are they really wanting to get into the nitty gritty in terms of what hinges are going on the door and what lock and what numerals and so on? Possibly not. The door manufacturer's obviously very interested in that. But quite often that's just down to a pricing situation. They just want the cheapest product that will allow them to comply with the particular regulations they've got to satisfy and so on. So we try to put a different approach into that, really, and get the specifier interested in saying, look, you really should take an interest in what handles are going on the door and so on, because if you don't and the products aren't up to scratch, you're going to have a lot of maintenance costs going forward.
So that's quite a task for you then, isn't it? And Simon, how do you fit in with that? How does Intelligent Hardware fit in?
My background is architectural ironmongery. I've worked for a company called Laidlaw, I did work for Laidlaw for 19 years. And basically we were an architectural ironmonger that specified product via architects, worked with clients, and also worked with contractors and end users to obviously make sure that the products that were being specified on any particular building or project were obviously compliant, and that all falls into with fire regs, etc. As I say, I was with them for 19 years. I joined UAP in January of this year. Initially, I was brought in as a business development manager, which was to help them look at the commercial side of their offer. Because traditionally, Intelligent Hardware supplied mainly into merchants, retail, and the architectural ironmongers around the country, who would then sell on and specify the products on projects.
So my first question to you, Paul, how has modern technology helped develop safer methods of keeping people from fire injury? Because this is such an important topic now, isn't it, fire injury?
Probably detection is the main thing. Early detection of fires and particularly compartmentation. If you take the Grenfell fire, which is probably the most topical subject at the moment, which has led to a lot of changes in the industry, which we'll probably come on to later on. But one of the very frightening things when I seen that building on fire when it came on the news and that morning was the amount of spread, because straight away I said to my wife, where's the compartmentation? Because the whole idea behind that is if a fire starts in a particular flat or an apartment, the compartmentation, the protection around that flat should treat it as a capsule, really. So that's the main thing that's developed over the years, and particularly after Lakenhall House, which was a similar fire to Grenfell, but nowhere near the sort of enormity. Probably about 10 years prior to Grenfell, a lot of things were learned from that. Unfortunately, they weren't put into implication, really.
And how does your industry feed into that with the doors and the hardware and modern technology?
Obviously, we do our own testing to make sure that the products in their own right are compliant. I'm thinking of things about, fire-rated letter plates are a good example. We have the right intumescent protection round, so that's going to last the prescribed amount of time, which is either 30 minutes or 60 minutes. So we'll do our own independent testing, and we also get it third-party audited through a certifier. So we know that our product individually, as an isolated component, will do the job in a suitable application.
That's a huge onus on you as a business, isn't it?
Absolutely. The onus is not fully on us, but certainly part of it, because and this is where we try to get in early and talk to specifiers and talk to the door manufacturers when they're going about testing their whole product. So the whole homogeneous thing, a door set, is made up of various components. We may supply 6 or 7, 8 of those components, which, as I said, we'll test individually for performance, for fire and so on. But the door manufacturer's then got to have his own evidence to underpin that. So, if we get involved in the early stages, we'll if they're doing some fire testing, for example, we want to know what their objective is to start with, what you're trying to achieve, and then we can hopefully give them advice and products that will help them meet that objective.
So Simon, over to you. What do you feel is the best way of sourcing products that help make fire doors robust and help make these products robust? How do you go about sourcing those products?
I think, as Paul's touched on, all our sourcing is generally from overseas. However, in recent years, the factories have obviously had to come up to standard on all the products that they supply. So any product that we source from overseas, we expect and demand that product has the relevant CE certification, certifier, and is up to all the relevant standards before we would even look to bring that product in. And as Paul has touched on, we also have done our own tests on some of the product to actually doubly support the product. So we tend to have evidence from the manufacturer, but then we'll also put it through a UK accredited test house such as Exover or Warrington Fire, to ensure that the test data is robust, and everything that we're getting from the factory we sort of double check and make sure that we're not relying on their testing without actually having backed it up ourselves.
Have the change in regulations made it more difficult to source suitable products?
I would say not. No. Because we're aware of how regulations are changing, then we just adapt and obviously change our test criteria, or the test houses are obviously updating their tests on a regular basis. So it's not made it any more difficult. It's just that you have to obviously keep up with current legislation to make sure the products are tested to the right standard.
I mean, as you say, it's become so much more important in recent years to get that third-party accreditation if you're checking the safety of your products. Why has there been such a push for that? Is that because of tragedies like Grenfell?
Yeah, Grenfell, one word, Grenfell, basically. Prior to that, there was, I wouldn't say there's a relaxed sort of mood in the market, but there was a lot of ignorance, a lot of assumptions being made about people thought they were doing the right thing, potentially. I gave an example before of fire-rated letter plates. I've known situations in the past where people, we supply that product with intumescent protection already around it, so we know it's going out into the market in exactly the same way that it was tested. But manufacturers were, for example, finding out they could buy the letter plate separately, cheaper. So they're buying the letter plate and then getting their own intumescent, which was probably a decent product, but nobody could prove that. And they would fit that round the letter plate and then fit it into their door, which is a dangerous thing to do because, even if it's a good intumescent, it's a good letter plate in itself, it's well constructed. It doesn't mean the two things going together are going to have the same performance as the one that we tested it with.
Do you think that's the way that things will go then in the future, that people will have to buy the door set, everything's there, fit and forget type mentality?
It's already good. I won't say forget, but that's a dangerous thing with fire doors. Actually, it's turned full circle because what they're saying now is fire doors are going to have... Legislation's about to be developed, we believe, to say that in buildings of in multiple occupation in particular, blocks of flats, care homes, sheltered housing, that sort of thing, they're going to have to check that the fire doors and the associated door closing devices are in good working order once a quarter, which is a task in itself. So that it's turned full circle now. So after the event, there's a lot more involvement going forward than there was before. Like you said before, the attitude was just, let's get the right product, or we think we're getting the right product, fit it, and then leave it. Well, you can't take a product and fit it and then just leave it and expect it 10 years later to be performing in the same manner.
I mean, the new fire, and I say the new fire door inspection scheme that's in place now. I mean, that's sort of gathered pace over the last 12 to 18 months, where there's been quite a number of individuals that have got the badge, if you like. They've gone on the course and they've been trained in how to inspect fire doors. So there's a lot more of that in the market now, where building owners and clients are actually engaging and employing these people to come and do a fire assessment check on all the fire doors on a regular basis. And there's companies that are literally setting up and just doing that now. So, I mean, that was something that wasn't as prevalent probably 18 months, 2 years ago. So the market is moving. The industry is trying to adjust, and that's a good thing. That's been done.
I was going to actually ask how regulations have changed within the industry to make these fire doors and systems more secure. And is that an example of a regulatory change?
There's actually two sort of products in the market, and there are different rules associated in both. One is a timber fire door, and the other one is a composite fire door. And the reason there's extra scrutiny on the composite door is that's the door that was used in Grenfell for all the entrance to all the flats, the main entrance of flats. And the government did some testing afterwards, after the event, if you like, during the autopsy, and they put some doors through the fire test. They're meant to be at least 30 minutes performance minimum, and some of them only lasted 10 to 15 minutes. So there was a massive uproar about that, about how can that happen when people are specifying an FD30 door? How can it only last 15 minutes? There's a lot of rules associated with composite doors that don't involve timber doors. Timber doors are traditionally been seen as the safer option.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, though, isn't it? Because you'd think that a product like wood or timber, which burns, but we've obviously used for thousands of years. How do you make a product like timber safer?
Well, composite door manufacturers might argue, fire door manufacturers might argue the case, because they'll say, well, we've got test evidence to prove that's not the case. But no matter, there is still a belief out in the marketplace that they're not as secure, they're not as reliable, and it's because they've had this bad publicity after Grenfell, some of which is justified, some of which isn't.
One of my questions is about third-party accreditation. It's becoming so much more important to gain third-party accreditation when checking the safety of products. Why has there been such a push for this in recent years?
Going back to what we said before about Grenfell, really, that's been the driver for a lot of this now. And people, I mentioned a phrase, global certification, and people used to get away with murder with that because they could get a product from a manufacturer and work off their global certification. So you could be a door manufacturer and you might not have any of your own certification prior to Grenfell. So you would be relying on a component manufacturer, for example, somebody who makes the door blank, the door slab, or the frame manufacturer, or even the lock manufacturer. They would do all the testing, because it's a very expensive thing to do. So the attraction for a smaller manufacturer in particular is that you don't have to carry out all your own. You don't have the risk and the expense of carrying out your own fire testing, and obviously having the people available to do it. You can piggyback, if you like, off evidence that's been generated by one of your suppliers, and it's obviously in their interest to allow you access to that information so that you can use their product, if you like. And that's still going on, but in a far more developed way now. So the attraction really from specifiers and manufacturers and end users is that people aren't allowed to work off global certifications anymore. Strictly speaking, people want to see direct evidence from the manufacturer in question. So for composite doors now, as a good example, the building regulations or Annex A of the building regulations now actually stipulate that a composite door can only be supplied into the market by a third-party accredited manufacturer.
And Simon, does that third-party accreditation then filter down to smaller components, not just the door slabs, but the components that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. I mean, most of, as we've said, all the products that we supply for a fire door. I mean, there are products that we do supply that aren't necessarily fitted to fire doors or don't require testing. There's such things like door stops and coat hooks and various other things that don't have to be fire tested. But anything that does, obviously, we ensure that the accreditation's there and the product's fully tested so that it can be fitted to it in a fire door application.
There are actually far less fires, notwithstanding the tragedy that was Grenfell. There are far less fires, aren't there, these days in buildings, yet the regulations are so much more onerous now, aren't they?
Yeah, but maybe there's not a lot of fires because the regulations are doing the job.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case with compartmentation that I mentioned before. You very rarely see a situation in a block of flats where the fire goes beyond the original seat, the original individual dwelling, and because it's built in, safety's built in at the start on new buildings nowadays. So that's why you don't get that. You're right. There used to be a lot more fires, and that was the reaction to having a lot more fires was to make sure that didn't happen in the future. And hopefully that's what's going to happen with high-rise buildings when they start taking the cladding off. Get around to doing it that they've promised. They're going to be a lot safer going forward.
How has UAP adapted to new regulations? I mean, you've touched on this. You've touched on answers to this question throughout. But how specifically has UAP adapted to new regulations to ensure safety for customers?
We've got just to touch on what UAP have. I mean, we have an internal team. A testing and specification team which Paul works with closely. Where we're doing tests on a regular basis, on all the products, and that can be from corrosion tests to fire tests, etc., etc. And we've got a dedicated team that are obviously all the time keeping up to speed with any changes in regulation, any new regulations where we think, well, we need our product to meet that regulation or that standard. So that's an ongoing process, as the industry changes and as the new regulations do come in, UAP's well positioned because of the expertise we've got within the business to actually, follow that and make sure that our products are bang up to date, basically.
You can argue it's easier for us to sell into the market now than it used to be. Our main route to market is door manufacturers, fire door manufacturers in particular. It used to be that you could possibly go out to the market and it'd always be about price, in terms of letter plates, fire rated letter plates, fire rated door viewers, door closers. It was really, all products were assumed to be to the standard, so it just came down to a pricing situation. That's changed now because the door manufacturer, in order to be able to take your product on, if he's not already tested it in his door set, he has to seek credentials from you so that to shortcut the process. They have what's called a field of application, because no door manufacturer could afford to test every single permutation of a fire door that they want to sell to market. So certain assumptions have to be made that other products in the range, or other sizes in particular in the range, will perform in the same way that the product you had tested. So if we can provide them with evidence, our own individual evidence that we have for our letter plate, our TS008 letter plate, to show that that's been independently tested, that makes it easier for them to go to their third-party notified body and introduce our component into their door set without doing any further testing themselves. So, which would be very expensive to do.
What's the future of fire protection then, both of you? Where do you think the future lies, and how can modern technology be involved even more than it is already?
Well, I think a good example is obviously everyone's got a mobile phone these days and iPods and so on. One interesting development that's come in, and there's been quite a lot of that recently, is devices to be able to read information off a fire door. As I mentioned before, one of the critical things after the door's been fitted is how it's maintained properly, and understanding where the products come from, where they need to go to get replacement parts and so on. Some people now are building in like readers into the actual door frame, so they can come along with a mobile phone and scan it and find out who the manufacturer was, what type of product it is, where the contact details are, what certification is. So it's replaced the labels. All products, manufactured products that are meeting regular, have to have a label on the door. But sometimes at the top of the door, if the ceiling height, the butt is restrictive, you're not going to even be able to get up there without to see the thing in the first place. They come off, so on and so forth. It's got a chip built into it, like you might have in your pet or whatever.
It sits at the moment. You'll have a big file, an O&M file with all your maintenance details, or where every single product's come from, and there's a guy flicking through a wad of paper about this deep to try and establish where the products come from and what the maintenance features are and what needs doing.
Yeah, it's very key that speed things up. And obviously, as a manufacturer, it's good for us to have a presence in that sort of environment, because we want repeat business for one thing, but it helps your reputation if you're at the forefront with the technology to help people identify where the products have come from in the first place. So there's a full audit trail. Again, it gives people comfort that the product's going to, it's not only suitable for now, but it's going to stand the test of time.
Yeah, and the test of human beings not doing what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely. It happens now and again, that.
What is the process of ensuring that your doors align with fire safety regulations? What's that process and how does it go?
Well, from our point of view, it's collaboration, really. We don't manufacture doors, but obviously our products end up on doors. To get to work with certain we'll identify certain manufacturers we want to work with because they'll give us the correct volumes and the right reputation, if you like, to being aligned with them. So we would get involved with them at an early stage to find out what products they want to take to market, and then we'll help with the testing. We've got expertise at this end, people who know what's needed to get a product through a fire test. So they want to take a product to market, we'll supply the components, as many as we can for that door, and we perhaps contribute towards the testing. The product's then fire test, and we can both share that evidence. So we've got primary evidence for our own individual components. The door manufacturer's got the holistic whole fire certification for the whole product as well. So that allows us, if we've contributed, to share that evidence potentially with other manufacturers and other people who want to use our products. So we're ensuring that we're not only are our components fit for purpose, but the product that they're going to end up in and that the end user is going to be utilising, we know that trail all the way through is robust. So that's the way we do it as a manufacturer. We test our own products individually, but we also have got to get involved with the person that's going to take that product to market. The person that puts it on the market, the manufacturer that puts it on the market, we have to have an understanding with them that they've used the correct products from us, and we've both tested them jointly, so that whoever's receiving that product at the end of it in the marketplace has got a full trail of individual components and the whole, as I said, the finished product really.
I agree with Paul exactly on that. I mean that's the process. As I say, we've touched on it earlier in the conversation that we ensure all our individual components are tested, have all the certification, and then it's a case of working with the particular door manufacturer or door supplier to actually work out exactly what of those components need to be on that door, and all the testing that goes with that, and we do support them on that.
And all of these things that you've talked about gives your customers absolute confidence that this is at the forefront of UAP's thinking in terms of fire safety. So many different systems in place and so much foresight and reacting to regulations and trying to be, as you said, Paul, ahead of the curve must give your customers so much confidence.
Yeah, I think so. Particularly where in the past there's been a bit of lack of confidence, I think, when the people find out you import most of your products. Let's be clear. Most hardware manufacturers or suppliers in the UK source the components from the Far East. So there was a little bit of I wouldn't say a belief in the market, but at least a suspicion that because products were coming in, you were only using those sources for cheap labour and so on. That's definitely not the case. And because of the third-party accreditation, as I mentioned before, the auditors will actually go out to the factories in China and check for themselves that they're meeting all the regulations. And of course, we don't just take their word for it. When the products come in here, we've got separate checks all the time for quality and for making sure they're compliant.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Paul, for being involved in this podcast and giving us some fantastic information there, some critical information. That's it for this series of the Hardware Intel podcast. Thank you again for joining us on this episode, and to all of our guests throughout the series. You can listen back to every episode again through your podcast provider. Thanks for joining us.